The afternoon sun fell heavily on the small houses of the colony. The narrow streets shimmered in heat. But behind one blue door, silence lived like a shadow. Inside, Sadia folded her prayer mat slowly, as if afraid even the sound of fabric might disturb the ghosts of her past. For 5 years, she'd lived like this, quiet, unseen, and untouched by anyone's sympathy. People had stopped whispering about her long ago, but she knew silence in such places never meant forgiveness. It only meant exhaustion. Once Sadia's life had been simple tea in the courtyard, a husband who brought flowers from the roadside, and evenings spent under the open shath roof, where she would count stars and make dua for a home filled with peace. Her husband, Adnan, was not cruel, but weak, the kind of man who bent under the weight of other people's opinions. When rumors began, whispers, that Sadia had someone else, that she was seen laughing with a stranger, Adnan's eyes changed. Not because he believed, but because everyone else did. One night, the argument had been short. "People are talking," he said. "I know," she whispered. "You should have cared what they think." "And you?" she asked softly. "Do you care what I feel?" The next morning, she was gone. Not by choice, but by verdict. Her own parents refused to take her back until the matter cleared, but matters like these never clear. They rot quietly, like wounds under the skin. Years passed. Sadia moved to a small village near Moulton, where she taught Quran to children. Her hands, once trembling with shame, now trembled only with age and fatigue. She had built a new rhythm of silence, morning prayers, small teaching sessions, long evenings spent alone on the chaff. Her dupatta wrapped like Amma. Every day, she heard the azan echo through the air, and with it came the reminder, people judge, but Allah sees. Sometimes she would sit under the sky and speak softly to him, not asking for justice anymore, only peace. "Ya Allah," she would murmur, "let them remember me only when their own hearts ache." One evening, a knock came at her door. It was Sajida, her old neighbor from the city. Her eyes were filled with the same mixture of guilt and curiosity that Sadia had seen too often. "They know now," Sajida said in a trembling voice. "Know what?" Sadia asked calmly. "That you were innocent. The man who spread those rumors, he confessed before dying. He said he was jealous. He wanted to destroy your marriage." Sadia's hands froze over the cup of tea she was pouring. The liquid overflowed silently onto the saucer, like her memories flooding back after years of restraint. For a moment, Sajida thought Sadia might cry, might rage, might demand apology, but she didn't. She only placed the cup on the floor, lifted her eyes toward the open roof, and whispered. Allah already knew. Her calmness terrified Sajida more than her pain ever could. That night, as the stars spread across the sky like forgotten promises, Sadia sat on her chaff again. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of earth after a distant rain. She thought of Adnan, of how easily he had let go, of how quickly everyone had chosen shame over truth. She thought of her chadar, the symbol everyone had used to measure her honor. How strange, she mused, that a piece of cloth defined a woman's worth but not a man's honesty. Under that open sky, she prayed again, not for those who wronged her, not even for herself, but for the world that keeps repeating its cruelty in the name of respect. Morning crept slowly through the narrow lanes of Moulton's outskirts. The azan echoed like a heartbeat, faint yet unshakable. Sadia stood by her small window, her dupatta drawn loosely over her head. The light touched her face gently, revealing years of peace carved from pain. The world outside had finally spoken her truth aloud. But truth, when it comes too late, doesn't bring justice. It only opens old scars that never healed. She poured tea into her worn clay cup and sat on the floor beside her mat. The sound of the boiling kettle mixed with distant birdsong, and for the first time in years, she felt a strange stillness in her chest, not happiness, not sadness, but something in between. Perhaps this was what acceptance felt like. In another part of the city, Adnan sat on his bed with the letter that Sajida had brought him. She forgave no one, the letter said, It wasn't written by Sadia, it was Sajida's words. After returning from her visit, but Adnan felt as though Sadia herself had spoken them. He stared at the wall, his head heavy with regret. His beard had grayed, his eyes carried the weight of sleepless years. Since that day, his house had remained half empty, his mother's eyes never meeting his friends no longer inviting him to gatherings. He had remarried once, for a brief time, but guilt does not share space with love. The second wife had left quietly, whispering, "You're haunted." And she was right. Adnan was haunted not by Sadia's absence, but by the silence she had left behind. Every night he saw her in dreams standing on the roof, the chaff with her chatter around her shoulders, her face turned upward to the sky. He would call her name, but she would never turn. Back in Sadia's village, whispers began again, different this time. People spoke of her as a woman closer to Allah, someone whose sabar had turned into divine favor. Some came to her for duas, some for stories. She listened to them, smiled faintly, but rarely spoke of her own life. One little girl, Amina, asked her one day, "Appa, why don't you live with your husband?" Sadia looked at her tenderly. "Because sometimes, Beta, a place can't hold both truth and people's lies at once. One has to leave." The child didn't understand, but she remembered the softness in Sadia's voice. That evening, Sadia sat on her chaff again. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep orange. She looked at her old prayer beads and thought, people believe they ruin lives with their lies, but Allah only delays his justice. He never denies it. Meanwhile, Adnan's restlessness grew. Sajida's words kept echoing in his mind. She only remembers her Rav now. He wanted to see Sadia, to ask for forgiveness, to kneel before her, to tell her he finally knew the truth. But what right did he have? He had destroyed not just her name, but her belonging. Still, guilt drives even the weakest hearts to courage. One morning, he left for the village. The bus ride was long, the road dusty and slow. Along the way, he saw children running barefoot, women carrying water pots, and the smell of sugarcane drifting through the air. Everything felt alive except him. When he reached Sadia's house, the door was open. He saw her sitting on the floor, teaching children to read Surah Rahman. Her voice was calm, low, filled with a peace he couldn't remember ever having. He stood there for a moment, unable to breathe. Then, slowly, he whispered, "Sadia." The children turned. Sadia looked up. For a long time, neither spoke. The years between them stretched like a river, wide, deep, impossible to cross. When the children left, Sadia motioned for him to sit. He hesitated. "Do I deserve to?" She said softly, "Every soul deserves a chance to repent, not a place to stay." He lowered his eyes. "They told me lies. She stopped him with a quiet gesture. "You believed them. That's enough." Adnan's eyes filled with tears. "Sadia, I came to ask for your forgiveness." Her gaze was steady, but gentle. "If it was mine to give, I would have given it long ago. But I left your matter to Allah." He swallowed hard. "You really can't forgive me?" She smiled faintly. "I don't hold anger anymore, but I cannot clean what others have stained. Only Allah can." Her words fell like rain, soft but unstoppable. As Adnan left, he turned once more. She stood on the chaff, her dupatta fluttering, her eyes lifted to the sky. For him, it was a moment of unbearable beauty and punishment combined. He whispered, "She never needed me. She only needed faith." And she, looking at the horizon, thought, "He finally understands, too late, but he does." That night, as the stars appeared again, Sadia prayed, not for him, not for herself, but for every woman who had been buried under false words. "Ya Allah," she whispered, "cover them with the same mercy you covered me with. Let their hearts never forget that. Your charter is stronger than the world's cruelty." Her tears fell silently, disappearing into the folds of her prayer mat. Above her, the sky stretched wide and endless, her only witness, her only friend. Days after Adnan's visit, the air in Sadia's village changed quietly. People spoke of the man who had come all the way from the city just to kneel before the woman he once destroyed. Some called it repentance, others curiosity. But to Sadia, it was neither. It was simply destiny fulfilling its final circle. She had long learned that life does not return what it takes. It only replaces pain with understanding. And understanding, she had discovered, was heavier than sorrow. In the small mosque nearby, Adnan stayed for a few days. He prayed every prayer in tears, every sighed, heavy with the weight of his past. The imam, a gentle old man, once asked, "Son, is your sin against man or against Allah?" Adnan hesitated. "Both." The imam nodded. "Then ask forgiveness from both. One may remain silent, but the other always listens." That night, Adnan wrote a letter. His words trembled across the page. "Sadia, I cannot undo what I did. My belief was weak, my pride blind. The world told me you were guilty. But the truth is, it was me who sinned first. When I stopped trusting you, I don't ask for your love or your return. I only ask that when you pray, you remember my name once not as your husband, but as a soul seeking mercy." He left the letter at her door before dawn and walked away without waiting for an answer. When Sadia found it, she sat for a long time, holding the paper between her fingers. The ink had smudged with what she knew were tears. She read the words again and again, not with bitterness, but with an ache that had no name. That night, she did mention his name in dua, but not as he had asked. She said, "Ya Allah, if you forgive him, let him live with peace, but never let him forget what trust costs when broken." Her tears fell soundlessly, absorbed by the rug beneath her. It was not vengeance she sought, but remembrance. Some wounds, she knew, must stay open so that people never forget the pain of causing them. As weeks turned to months, something unexpected began to stir in the nearby town. People who once spoke ill of Sadia began to visit her small home. They brought food, oil, and sometimes flowers, their eyes lowered, their voices trembling with apology. One woman said, "We didn't know, we just followed what others said." Sadia looked at her and smiled faintly. That's how lies survive, because truth always walks alone. They left weeping. Soon, the local mosque announced a community gathering. The imam invited Sadia to attend. At first she refused. What use were their apologies now? But that night she dreamt of rain falling through the roof, washing everything clean. When she woke, her heart whispered, perhaps this too is Allah's will. So on a soft Friday afternoon, Sadia walked into the mosque courtyard. People fell silent as she entered. Some wept quietly. Others couldn't meet her eyes. Adnan stood near the back, dressed in plain white, his face pale but peaceful. When he saw her, he lowered his gaze instantly. The imam began to speak about Tao, repentant, the weight of false witness in Allah's eyes. Words, he said, can destroy a life, but Allah's mercy can rebuild even what shame has burned. Still, not every wound is meant to close. Sadia listened in silence. Her heart was calm, almost still, like a lake after storm. When the imam asked if she wanted to speak, she rose slowly. Her voice was low, but every syllable carried power, greater than, "You all came to wash your hands in the water of guilt. But remember, forgiveness does not belong to me, it belongs to the one above the chaff. I have nothing to give except my silence, and in that silence, you may find his justice." Then she turned and walked out before anyone could stop her. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as she disappeared into the fading light. That evening, Adnan followed her at a distance. She climbed to her roof, the same chaith where she always prayed. He watched as she spread her prayer mat, her chatter catching the golden rays of sunset. She raised her hands to the sky, her voice soft and trembling. He couldn't hear the words, but he knew she was speaking to the one who had always listened when no one else did. In that moment, Adnan fell to his knees in the street below, whispering, "Ya Allah, give her every piece I stole. Let my restlessness be my punishment and my mercy." And then he wept, openly, helplessly, while she continued her prayer above, untouched by his grief. In the days that followed, Sadia's home became quieter than ever. She stopped teaching for a while, spent most of her time on the roof, her eyes tracing clouds that passed slowly like forgotten thoughts. Sometimes she felt a strange nearness to Allah, as if the silence itself had become a language between them. At other times, she felt her body fading, her spirit turning lighter, as though the world's weight was finally releasing her. One afternoon, Amina, her little student, came running. "Appa, a letter came for you." It was from Adnan again, but this time only a single line, greater than, "When I die, bury me far from you, for even my dust is unworthy of your forgiveness." Sadia closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She only whispered, "May Allah forgive him sooner than I could." And then she turned her gaze upward, to the sky that had always been her witness. The last days of winter came quietly that year. The mornings were cold, the air soft and silver. Sadia's small courtyard, filled with sunlight that broke through, the trees like gentle fingers of mercy. She sat by the wall, her prayer beads resting on her lap, her eyes half closed. The world around her had changed in ways she never imagined. Those who once whispered behind her back now came to her for advice. Those who had judged her now sought her prayers. And yet, Sadia never spoke of pain or forgiveness again. It was as if she had placed her entire story into Allah's hands and walked away. One morning, Sajida came to visit again. Her face was older now, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes still carried the guilt of years ago. "Sadia," she said softly, "you've become something sacred to these people." Sadia smiled faintly. "I've only become quiet," Sajida. "People mistake silence for holiness." Sajida held her hand. "Adnan is ill. They say his time is near." Sadia looked toward the open door where sunlight spilled in like a warm prayer. "Then may Allah make his ending peaceful. He has already carried enough regret." Sajida's eyes filled with tears. "You really forgave him, didn't you?" Sadia shook her head. "No, I simply stopped remembering what he did." "There's a difference." Forgetting pain is not forgiveness, it's freedom. That night, Sadia went to the roof again. The chaith had always been her secret place, the only witness to her tears, her strength and her faith. She spread her prayer mat slowly, her fingers tracing the familiar lines of woven thread. Above her, the stars shimmered like verses unspoken. She began her prayer not with requests, but with gratitude. For the pain that made her strong, for the silence that taught her patience, for the isolation that led her closer to Allah. As she bowed her head in sujud, her heart whispered, "Ya Allah, you are always enough." And in that whisper, she found peace deeper than words. A few days later, the people of the village woke to the sound of the mosque bell. Sadia had passed away in her sleep, her prayer beads still in her hands, her chadar neatly folded beside her. They buried her near the old mango tree behind the mosque, where the wind always moved gently through the leaves. Children she had taught came with flowers. Women wept quietly. Sajida stood beside the grave, her hands trembling. She never asked for justice, she said to the imam. And yet see how beautifully Allah honored her. The imam nodded, because she left her case to the judge above the sky. The world only carries pride. He carries truth. Far away in the city hospital, Adnan took his final breath the same morning. He had refused all comfort, asking only for a small window to face the open sky. In his hand was a page from the Quran Surah Al-Inshirah. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. His last words were a whisper. She was right. Only Allah knew. The nurse found a small silver ring in his pocket engraved with her name. She didn't know who Sadia was, but she placed it on his chest as they covered his body. Months passed. The story of Sadia Appa spread across towns and cities. People spoke of her patience, her silence, her strength, but no one truly knew that. She had never sought to become an example. She had only sought peace. Amina, now a grown woman, often visited Sadia's grave. She would sit under the tree, reciting quietly, "Appa, I understand now. The chatter was not just clouds, it was your shield, your dignity, your proof that faith is stronger than any accusation. And whenever the wind rustled through the branches, she felt as if Sadia's spirit was still there watching, praying, forgiving through silence. Years later, when the roof of Sadia's old house was repaired, the mason found a small wooden box hidden beneath the bricks. Inside was a single note in her handwriting. People took my name, my home, my peace, but Allah gave me something greater himself. If you ever doubt his justice, look at the sky. It remembers every truth the world forgets. The mason handed the note to the imam, who placed it in the mosque library, beside the Quran she once taught from. And from that day, whenever anyone in the village spoke of injustice, someone would always say softly, "Remember Sadia and remember the chador and the chath both belong to Allah." The story of Sadia ended, but her silence continued to echo in every woman who bore false judgment, in every man who learned too late what trust means, and in every heart that still believed in divine justice. Because some souls do not demand justice on earth. They wait for it quietly under the sky, a story of faith, dignity, and Allah's unseen justice.